When it was released, Mafia 3 was seriously looking like a solid contender for this year's worst PC port. The game was plagued by a number of issues, the most extreme of which for PC gamers was the 30 FPS cap. For reasons surely none of us could understand, developer Hangar 13 and publisher 2K Games thought it would be okay to deliver us a game capped at console level performance. The moment it became apparent to gamers that they were stuck at 30 FPS, they began posting Steam reviews in droves, leaving less than flattering comments about the game. Having seen this, I canned my performance breakdown of the game and moved on to other projects. Thankfully, it wasn't long though before 2K Games announced a patch to fix the various issues, and the patch arrived within a few days. This update enabled gamers to use one of three frame rate options, being 30, 60 and unlimited FPS. Gamers can quickly change the frame rate cap by heading to the display menu and looking for the options in the frame rate settings once the patch is installed. So, now that it is possible to render in excess of 30 FPS on PC, what kind of hardware are you looking at for a highly playable, lag-free experience? With the game maxed out at 1080p, 1440p and 4K, we plan to find out using the latest and previous generation AMD and Nvidia GPUs. For testing, a simple 60-second Fraps pass has been recorded. We start at the mission titled A Taste of the Action. Here the player is preloaded into a car which they're meant to drive to Sammy's bar. Instead, we go on a 60-second drive in the wrong direction for this test, and the path we take is easy to accurately replicate over and over again, as we did. Here's a quick look at the rest of that pass now. First up, let's check out how last season's GPUs handled this new title. Starting at 1080p, things look a little grim. The value-oriented GTX 960 and R9 380 only just broke the 30 FPS barrier. Meanwhile, the GTX 970 and R9 390 were only good for a little over 40 FPS. Meanwhile, the mighty Fury X and 980 Ti struggled to reduce the desired 60 FPS. Moving to 1440p, not a single previous generation GPU could reach 60 FPS in our test. The 980 Ti and Fury X both saw a minimum of 41 FPS, while the average of the GeForce GPU was slightly higher at 48 FPS. As for the rest of the field, it took the GTX 970 to only just crack the 30 FPS barrier. Given what was seen at 1440p, we didn't really need to test 4K, but I know you guys will want to see the data anyway, so here it is. Yeah, not much to say here really, so let's move on. Even with the current generation mainstream cards, Mafia 3 isn't exactly highly playable at 1080p, as frame rates are well below 60 FPS. The RX 480 and GTX 1060 6GB delivered virtually the same performance with 45 FPS each. The 3GB 1060 wasn't much slower, averaging 43 FPS. Meanwhile, Nvidia's big guns all pushed over 60 FPS. Now at 1440p, we find that unless you enjoy console-like performance, gamers will require at least a GTX 1070. Even then, for a much more desirable 60 FPS, be prepared to shell out for a GTX 1080. Even the insane Titan XP can't achieve 60 FPS at 4K, as minimums drop down to 30 FPS. This clearly isn't a 4K friendly title at this point in time. Throwing everything together, we see some pretty competitive performance at 1080p between AMD and Nvidia's current and previous generation GPUs. The mixed 1440p results really highlight just how much faster the GTX 1080 and Titan XP GPUs are than everything else we have right now. AMD's Vega lineup can't get here soon enough. And again, here are the 4K results. Not much to say here. The Titan XP is really the only GPU you would consider using to play this game at 4K. Something I noticed when benchmarking all those graphics cards was how high the CPU utilization was on my Core i7 6700K 4.5GHz test machine. Typically, we only see utilization hovering around the 40 to 50% mark for most games, so seeing it constantly pinned above 60% and even going over 70% was surprising. This is a result of the game not just loading up all 4 cores, but also taking advantage of hyper-threading with load spread across all 8 threads. For a game, this is a very rare sight, and it could spell disaster for anyone running anything less than a quad-core processor. Before wrapping things up, I took a quick look at CPU performance with the 6700K. When clocked at 4.5 GHz, we still saw a 10% drop in average frame rate, which was surprising. Keeping in mind we're testing at 1080p with a Titan XP, so an extreme case scenario, but still surprising results nonetheless. What was interesting were the results found when testing the CPU locked at 3.5 GHz. With hyperthreading enabled, the performance was the same as what we found at 4.5 GHz. However, with hyperthreading disabled, performance took a huge dive. The minimum frame rate was reduced by 30%. Mafia 3 is a great looking game, but does it justify the huge demand just seen not only on the GPU but also the CPU? I tend to think no is the answer here. This is likely a case of yet another rough console port. I'm sure many of you, like me, lost all faith in the developer when they decided to port the game to PC with a 30 FPS cap. How does that even happen? For 1080p, gamers are ideally going to want at least a GeForce GTX 1060 or Radeon RX 480 from this current generation, while last gen's GTX 970 or RX 390 will suffice, if only just. 1440p was a seriously tall order, and unless you have a previous generation flagship graphics card or one of Nvidia's big Pascal GPUs, forget about the high quality settings. As for 4K, unless you have one of the most extreme systems getting around, be prepared to scale that resolution down. Multi-GPU support doesn't exist either, so GPU teamwork isn't going to help out here either. Both AMD and Nvidia have provided game-ready drivers for Mafia 3, though I noticed no difference in performance between the latest optimized driver and the previous version. I did notice the performance throughout the game does vary quite a bit depending on where you're located and the time of day. Driving seems to be the most taxing thing you can do for performance, and the more densely populated the area, the worse the performance is going to be. I'd say my results are fairly typical, but there are parts of the game where frame rates will dip even lower, so be aware of that too. Another huge performance variable is the CPU. The demand on the processor is pretty extreme. Quite a few Core i5 owners have been complaining about stuttery performance due to 100% load across all 4 cores. This is further evidence of a poorly ported game. It's hard to believe that you need a Core i7 processor to avoid stuttery gameplay, especially for this type of title. So hopefully the game will receive further patches to address these performance issues. What do you guys think? Have you guys tried Mafia 3? Let me know in the comments. I'm your host Matt as always, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers guys for joining me for another episode of Hardware Unboxed. To those of you that already support the channel, thank you so much, it's truly appreciated. And to those of you that would like to support the channel directly, I do have Amazon links and a Patreon link in the video description below. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you guys next time.